All right, Nuggets fans, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by good friends here at Mile High Sports. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am ready to talk about the Denver Nuggets bench. We're going to talk about fixing this thing. We're going to talk about kind of what went wrong a little bit, different players that were involved off of this bench unit. I did an article on milehighsports.com earlier on Monday, just sort of going through the players that didn't make the cut in the playoff rotation. Basically, everybody beyond Julian Strawther. It was Russell Westbrook, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther. I think those were the three guys that ultimately played the most amount of time, and they were the only three. And that was one of the big weaknesses for Denver. They didn't really have a lot of optionality. They didn't have a lot of players that they thought they could trust in that moment. And you start to look around, you start to look at why. You talk about the different options that didn't make it. And I do think that it is a valuable exercise to at least go through those players when we're talking about, can Denver win a championship? Because most people look at the core players, most people look at the core mechanisms and practices. Denver already had their championship caliber starting unit. And looking through a lot of these numbers, it's hard to really argue with that fact. Of course, getting through the regular season is about having depth. It's about having optionality. It's about having more than just star power. And it seems like the playoffs might be something similar if you look at Indiana and Oklahoma City. I already talked about that last week. Don't want to rehash it, but I do think that there is a massive amount of value in terms of adding to your team, adding to your bench unit, and basically saying, hey, we don't have to have 8 or 9 guys that play every single night. It could be 10 guys. It could be 11 guys and only 10 play at a time. It could be 13 different players that we trust day in and day out. And yeah, only 10 are going to play on a consistent basis, but it could be a different 10. And I think that Denver's kind of gotten away from that a little bit in terms of not having enough options, not having enough players that they could really trust and go to. And as a result, their bench became shorter and shorter and shorter. So, first segment, we are going to talk about fixing the bench units. Basically, let's say everybody comes back. Who's going to play? I'm going to show a graphic later that I think will kind of encapsulate just how important this conversation is. Second segment, we'll talk about changes that may happen. There was a rumor that came around about Russell Westbrook potentially not just leaving the Nuggets, but leaving the NBA. What would that mean if that were true, if he decided to take that up? And then talk about the different options that Denver has on the roster to kind of upgrade over what they currently have. So, without further ado, let's get into it. I wanted to go through and talk about these different players. Russell Westbrook, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, I think those guys are locks to play if they do come back. If everybody is back, if the starters are back, if those three are back, those three guys are locks to play. The guy who played the next most minutes on the team last year or this past season was DeAndre Jordan. Played the most minutes he's ever played in a Nuggets uniform. I believe it was 690 or so. And that clearly was not the plan going into this thing. The plan was for Dario Saric to play. The plan was for Deron Holmes to play. Neither of those guys were out there for different reasons. Deron Holmes hurt his Achilles. Not just hurt it, he tore it. And Dario Saric, he just didn't end up being very good and somebody that the Nuggets could trust. It's too bad, too, because that was their biggest free agency chip. So when we talk about how Denver could get better, they can't screw that up this time. They have to get a guy who they know is going to be able to play, because Dario Saric played just 210 minutes for the team this last year compared to DeAndre Jordan, who played 3 times as much. That is ridiculous. DeAndre, I don't know if he's going to be back. Going into his 18th NBA season, maybe he comes back, maybe he doesn't. He's obviously a great veteran for Denver to have around. But if the Nuggets are looking to prioritize getting better, they have to look at improving upon the current spots on their roster. And the easiest way to do that is to turn your unrestricted free agents into better players. Whether they can or not, that remains to be seen. So DeAndre Jordan is kind of a maybe on if he comes back or not. DaRon Holmes, I think he would be the next step. If you're talking about Westbrook, Strother, Watson, I think DaRon Holmes for a lot of people, unless they like, and this is talking about internal options, he would be the guy who I think is expected to play the next most amount of time. Now, whether that happens or not remains to be seen. Somebody asked me on social media, I'm recording this on Monday night, so earlier today, what kind of expectations, like first of all, what position does he play? And like, how much can you count on DaRon Holmes? And I hesitate to put real expectations on him or on any rookie coming off of a torn Achilles because we just don't know like how much he's going to be able to pick up, what he's going to be able to accomplish. Like, was he in those meetings really seriously thinking about how he would do in those situations? He hasn't gone through the reps. He hasn't gone through all of the adjustment period to the NBA. And again, he's not quite a late 20s draft pick, but he's pretty close, kind of a lower end of the first round draft pick. And Julian Strother, when he was first coming in, only played 500 or so minutes. Peyton Watson didn't play that much. Like he played closer to, I think, 200, somewhere around there. Christian Brown played more, obviously. He was the 22nd overall pick, so maybe this is closer to a Christian Brown type of draft pick. I believe Christian played about 800 to 1,000, I want to say, in his rookie year. So could DaRon Holmes play somewhere close to that? Sure, but he's also coming off of injury, so we'll see what it looks like. We'll see how he adjusts to that. But I do think that that is, of course, from getting 0 minutes out of his roster spot to getting whatever they get is very likely going to be a positive outcome for Denver. It should yield more wins as a result. Jalen Pickett and Zeke Naji are the next options for me. Pickett, of course, played the 10th most amount of minutes on the team. Zeke Naji played the 11th most minutes on the team. Could those guys play more in certain situations? Maybe. I think Pickett is best positioned as the really great third point guard who sometimes comes in and is the backup. If Westbrook is gone, could he step up and play a slightly larger role? Yes. I don't really think that's an awesome outcome, though, for Denver, just from a value perspective, because you're not going to be able to tangibly replace that. But if you were able to, and we'll talk about this later, if you were able to replace Westbrook with a different position that fills that sixth man role, like hypothetically speaking, a Bruce Brown at the shooting guard spot, the small forward spot, then you could see Jalen Pickett filling in as the ninth man or the 10th man or whatever it ends up being. And I think that that would be a perfectly reasonable role for him based off of where he's at, based off of what progression should look like for his third season. I talked about this a little bit in the article. He's one of those guys that had the most tug of war between Michael Malone and Calvin Booth through that entire feud. If he just can take a step back, take a little breath, he might just play a little better and be able to develop comfortably in a situation where he's not the hyperfixation on whatever feud is going on between those guys within the organization. So that's at least a positive view. Do I think that if he did progress, do I think it's going to be massive? No. I don't think that he's going to suddenly be like Tyus Jones or Monte Morris or somewhere in that vicinity, a Fred VanVleet kind of type. He's not going to be that guy. He's already older than where those guys were kind of when they broke into the league and had success. Could he be better than where he was? Of course. Like Jordan McLaughlin is the name that I keep coming back to with him. Somebody who for Minnesota was very successful as a occasional backup point guard. But when he became the main guy, they were very soon like, yeah, we kind of need to get better than that. So I think he's going to perpetually be about that 10th or 11th man for teams in the NBA. I would not expect much more than that. And if Denver has to, then that's probably not enough talent for a playoff rotation spot. Zeke Naji, we've already gone through the song and dance before with him on a number of occasions. Maybe there's, again, kind of like Jalen Pickett. He's actually younger than Jalen, which is crazy, but he'll be entering his 6th NBA season. For what it's worth, talking to some folks behind the scenes, I don't think Denver's going to be able to trade Zeke Naji, at least not without giving up significant assets in return. So the only way to increase his value, because that's the thing, is he's just not seen as any sort of value player for any other team because of how his experience with Denver has gone. Teams don't think he's very good. So how do you change that perception? You have to play him. You have to put him into a situation where he looks better. But the more you play him and the more you kind of expose whether he's good or bad, that can get very dangerous very quickly. So I don't know. We're going to see. But I do think, like, people might be surprised, hypothetically, if Deron Holmes is playing fewer minutes than Zeke Naji next year because they are literally trying to increase Zeke's value. That would not surprise me in the slightest. But I don't expect him to be a playoff guy. So if I'm Denver, I try to find other options that can play. You don't necessarily want to have to bury Zeke because he's still under contract for another 3 years beyond this one. So it's going to be very difficult for Denver to kind of turn that like roster spot and salary value around into something that is worth more than where he's at currently, because he's still the 5th highest paid player on the team. And that's not going to change until Christian Brown gets his extension. So that's going to be pretty tenuous, so to say. Next up is Hunter Tyson, Dario Saric, and Vlatko Cancar. Those are the kind of 13th, 14th, and 15th guys if Denver were to bring everybody back. I think that Hunter probably has the best chance of those 3 to play. I think that Dario's basically done. He's somebody that Denver probably, it seems to me like they basically made the decision after like game 15 of the NBA season this past year that Dario was not going to play. Vlatko, I just don't think is healthy enough. And I think he's lost a step just in terms of where he was at physically. And then he suffered multiple injuries and couldn't really get back to that. If there was a guy that could take I compared Hunter Tyson to Jake LaRavia on a previous show. Like, surprising, bad first couple of years. 3rd year starts to get an opportunity to really turn some things around. Maybe there's something there. I just don't think that he's athletic enough to really handle what Denver needs him to handle within their system. Maybe they change the system and maybe that changes some things for Hunter specifically, but I just don't really have high hopes there. And that's too bad because you would want to be able to have at least one of those guys come off the bench and basically say, "Oh yeah, we can really do something here." But I don't think they're going to get it from Hunter. I don't really think they're going to get it from Dario, who's under contract, or Vlatko, who is not under contract. So actually, Dario's got the player option. He's probably going to opt in. People are thinking like, hey, maybe he takes a deal overseas. I don't think he's going to get the proposed deal that Russell Westbrook just got proposed, apparently. Okay, those are the final roster spot guys. The 3 players that I also want to mention, Trey Alexander, Spencer Jones, PJ Hall. These were the 3 players that Denver had coming off of the bench for 2-way contract spots. And none of them really got an opportunity. I think Alexander played about 20 games. Spencer Jones played about 20 games. PJ Hall played even less than those guys, maybe like 14. Vast majority of what they did was garbage time. Trey Alexander got some opportunities early in the season. He was bad, like just straight up wasn't ready. There are some things that he could do to improve. He was a rookie, of course. Spencer Jones was a rookie. PJ Hall was a rookie. I think with Jones, we'll start with Alexander. He just needs to make shots. Like, he has to be that guy that if you're going to come off the bench, if you're going to dribble into mid-range contested jumpers. If you're going to try to get to the rim, you have to make the shots that you're taking. And maybe he does. Maybe he plays really well over summer league and Denver decides to bring him back. Spencer Jones, 3-and-D big wing, who showed some really good things defensively, I'll say, but only shot 1 of 17 from 3. Keep in mind, Trey Alexander only shot 3 of 17, so it's not like that's very small sample size for both of those guys, and they were both very bad. But with Spencer Jones, like, you actually saw him impact an actual game and a rotation positively. There was a win that Denver had against Golden State earlier in the season that he actually contributed very positively to. And maybe there is a world where he irons out the jump shot and suddenly starts to be a little bit more valuable. I don't know. We'll see. Like, gonna have to make some progressions, that's for sure. And then PJ Hall is the final one. He played the least amount of time, but he's also sneaky, a guy that I think could play. I think just talking to Matt over at Locked On, he really likes PJ Hall. He seems to think that there is something that he can do connectively, just roll man, pop man, understanding what his role is, what his opportunity is. He's going to rebound. He's going to score off like layups and pick and rolls and pick and pop jumpers. And he's going to fight on defense and just try to execute the scheme as best as he can. He's undersized. He's like 6'8", like is going to be an undersized backup 5 if he was to play. But I don't hate it. Like, the entire NBA is effectively undersized right now. And Denver just needs different players that can play, that can move, that can understand what they're supposed to do. So I would love to see what he did in Summer League if they were able to give him an opportunity. And maybe there's something more there. But do I think any of those guys get a full-time roster spot with Denver? No. But I also think that what they could do going forward is try to actually use their two-way spots and use those guys to play during the season whenever they possibly can, because Denver just doesn't have enough data on any of these guys in order to make an actual determination of what they're supposed to do. So, like, can Trey Alexander play? Spencer Jones, PJ Hall? We don't really know. So it's hard for me to make these massive proclamations about these guys' futures when they've each played less than 125 minutes in their NBA careers. So, okay. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about this Russell Westbrook Tel Aviv rumor, and we are going to talk about how Denver turns what is probably going to be about 3 open bench spots into a much better bench. We'll be back here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we are back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. The views on these have been really good. And I've just been very appreciative of everybody for, like, despite the fact that I haven't been going live as much, people are still checking in. People still want to see, people still want to hear. And I appreciate those that are commenting. I'm not reading through all of the comments, but I read through as many as I can. And I do appreciate the thoughts for the most part. It's been pretty good. I do always like good constructive feedback. Okay. Let's talk about this Russell Westbrook rumor quickly. Denver, if they were to lose Russell Westbrook on an NBA contract, I would not expect it to be a large one. I would expect it to be somebody's taxpayer mid-level exception where he signs and then becomes an option for a team just to, like, okay, you're probably going to be a 1-year guy, 2-year guy. Maybe it's a very similar deal to what he signed, 1 year plus a player option for a playoff team. There's also the opportunity for teams like Dallas, Sacramento, Milwaukee is another one that I throw out there, that these teams that need a point guard in a pinch, Like, are they going to go for Dennis Schroeder? Are they going to go for Spencer Dinwiddie? Maybe they want more playmaking. Maybe they want somebody who can really set the table for some of their players a little bit better, and they go for Russell Westbrook. Um, I don't know if that's the direction that teams would want to go in for the starting position, but you can't really argue with the production. Russell Westbrook definitely was very productive for the Nuggets this year. You find an opportunity for him as a pick and roll guy, give him a good roll man, give him some good spot up shooters. He can help you get through a year. So it wouldn't surprise me if that happened in the NBA. But what's come out recently, and I didn't really recognize this in the moment last week, it was kind of under the radar, but then started to kind of surface. I've got some of the main like the aggregation sites that are blocked. Like I just don't want to get my news from them. But I saw this and thought I might as well talk about it. There's a Serbian reporter. I don't have his name, um, but he is reporting pretty consistently about EuroLeague, reporting pretty consistently about all of the free agency dealings, the rumors, the trade dealings. He's basically Sham Charania for EuroLeague. Or actually, I don't know if I'm overstating who he actually is, but he's got a pretty solid following. And effectively said that Maccabi Tel Aviv, one of the Israeli teams that just qualified for EuroLeague this year, is expected to throw out a massive offer at Russell Westbrook to try to sway him to come from the NBA overseas. And we've seen teams do that before. We've seen European teams, teams across the pond, whether it's in China, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Middle East. We've seen a lot of these teams throw out these massive contracts to try to sway stars, or not even stars, but like previous stars. And I think Russell Westbrook qualifies as somebody who's about to enter his 18th season. He's not going to get anything more than like maybe part of the non-taxpayer mid-level, about 8 million, I would guess, in the NBA. Whereas the offer that was thrown out there was 5 years, 150 million, according to this source. And that's 30 million a year. You get it guaranteed, $150 million. I don't know what if it's a fully guaranteed contract and what those rules are. But if it is, then like he's only probably going to get a guaranteed 4 million or 5 million or anything like that in the NBA, maybe 8 million. And so like if this is a financial decision, then maybe Russ considers something like that. Now he's made a whole heck of a lot of money in his NBA career. I wouldn't necessarily expect him to really want to decide to do this. He still very clearly wants to be in the NBA. But if the Nuggets decided that they wanted to go a different direction, then maybe this would facilitate that. It wouldn't surprise me at all, especially with some of the comments that David Adelman made about wanting to play slower, wanting to be more of an execution-based team. Kind of doesn't necessarily go as hand in hand with Westbrook, with the higher pace, going downhill. His turnover rate's pretty high, things like that. It just wouldn't surprise me if they didn't like jive as much as maybe they expect, and this becomes an opportunity for Russ. Now, is this real? I don't know. Like it's hard for me to confirm this sitting from my spot here in Denver, but like apparently they made contact with Russ, initial contact, and we're thinking about making those at least more than initial talks. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens on it. But I just wanted to talk about it. Look, if he stays, he's probably going to be Denver's sixth man. I don't see any reason why like Denver would change up that much. Maybe he goes down to being the seventh man. Maybe that's something like Peyton Watson averaged 24 minutes per game. Maybe he goes up to 26. Maybe Russ goes from 28 to about 24, and they kind of swap places a little bit. Maybe it's even lower than that. And maybe when you start to talk about what his role would be with Denver, maybe Russ just wants to go run a team, and maybe that's appealing. And I wouldn't blame him for that. Like it sounds it sounds pretty sick to go make 30 million in your 18th season. So, hey, more power to him if he does. Um, like I said, Pickett could step up as a decent backup point guard if Russ were to leave, but it wouldn't be life changing. But I want to throw out this graphic really quickly. This is statistical. This is so for my audio listeners, sorry, I'll try to narrate this as best as possible. This is a bar graph that basically graphs every Denver Nuggets roster spot player outside of Deron Holmes, who didn't play. Everybody that played this past season by estimated plus minus wins, which is a metric that that Dunks and Threes has. It's a metric that I actually trust. I do think that they know what they're trying to measure, and I trust what they are trying to measure. It's not like it's not perfect. Nothing is ever perfect, but I think this is pretty interesting. So out of the gate, you can really see Jokic, 20 wins, super high, was only second. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander was slightly higher than him at like 20.3. But part of that is because of the wins that the Thunder had specifically. Christian Brown is second at 9.7. He was 25th in the entire NBA in EPM wins. Jamal Murray's third at 8.1. He was about 43rd in the NBA. That sounds about right. Michael Porter, 6.2. He was at 64th in the NBA. That sounds about right, given where he was in the regular season. Aaron Gordon was all the way down at 3.8, 127th in the NBA, but that's because he was hurt. And those are your starters. And now here's where the visualization comes into effect. Russell Westbrook had 2.4 wins. That was 181st. So if you're kind of going by expectations are that the top 150 players are your 150 starters in the NBA, 30 teams, 5 starters per. Then Russell Westbrook was just outside of that, but a really high quality bench player, 2.4. Peyton Watson's down at 1.2 total wins accumulated by this metric, and that's 248th in the entire NBA. Jalen Pickett, 0.8. He's up next. It's not Julian Strawther. Then it's DeAndre Jordan at 0.5. Then Zeke Naji at 0.4. Then PJ Hall at 0.1. He's 366th. Spencer Jones, minus 0.1 at 468th in the entire NBA. Dario Saric, 470th. Trey Alexander, 471st. Vlatko Čančar, 478th. Hunter Tyson, 490th. He's minus 0.3 EPM wins accumulated. They were actively saying that he was making Denver worse, which is tough for an accumulation thing. It's not just like winning minutes by plus minus, where Hunter's definitely way lower on that. But he's not the worst Nugget. The worst Nugget was Julian Strawther, who accumulated minus 0.7 wins per EPM wins. That was 509th, the 15th worst mark in the entire NBA. Now, was Julian Strawther the 15th worst player in the NBA? No, that's not what this is trying to say. That is not what this is trying to do. But he was a negative player, and he had a large role. He had a much larger role, of course, than any of those guys, PJ Hall, Spencer Jones, Dario Saric, Trey Alexander, Vlatko, Hunter. And so as a result, he was pretty negative. There are, I think, some underlying stats and underlying metrics that would say not really feeling the Julian Strawther experience. I'm going to go ahead and say he's the exact kind of archetype, a scoring, off-ball kind of wing, not a high-level defender. He's the exact kind of guy that these metrics hate, while Christian Brown is the exact kind of guy that these metrics love, and it does not necessarily reflect, it's not a perfect reflection of where those guys are actually in the NBA. Like Christian Brown's not the 25th best player in the NBA, and Julian Strawther's not the 509th best player in the NBA. They are both way closer to each other. It's probably, Christian's probably the 100th or so best player in the NBA right now. And I'd say that Julian is probably closer to 180th. Maybe lower than that. Maybe like 200th, 220th, somewhere around there. But like the metrics aren't going to fully reflect that. I do think that what that says though, and when I listed out those numbers of those rankings across the league, what I'm trying to put out there, and I'll put it back up on screen, is that the Nuggets did not get enough wins added from the rest of their rotation outside of their starting unit. You can expect Aaron Gordon to be higher next year. He's going to be healthier, knock on wood. If Michael Porter and Jamal Murray are about the same, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Like Jamal's about 40th in the NBA in EPM wins. Porter's about 65th. Sure, that sounds about right. Christian Brown might be a little bit lower. He's probably not going to play as many games, probably not going to play as many minutes. But if he did, then sick. That would be great. But I wouldn't expect him to play as much. So if you expect Aaron Gordon to be better, Christian Brown to be maybe slightly worse, Jokic will, of course, be Jokic. I'm not sure even what to do with him. Then you have to get more, like the next five guys, Westbrook, Watson, Pickett, Jordan, and Zeke Naji. They added up to about, that's 1.7, 2.9, 4.3, no, 5.3 total wins accumulated from their 6th to 10th players. And then their like 11th to 17th effectively was actually hurting them and making it worse. So, like, that's going to happen in the NBA, especially when you don't have a very deep team. So, Denver, could they get a little bit deeper? Could they extend and get a couple more wins from the end of their bench? Maybe turn some of their weaknesses into better strengths? I think that would be at least the hope. And it just wouldn't surprise me at all if they were able to accomplish that. Like, that's a pretty small thing, and that's a pretty reasonable thing. Is it going to change their life in the playoffs? No, but it could help them get more than 50 wins. Like, a lot of things went wrong for Denver this past year, and they got 50. And you look at the way that their starters performed in this particular graphic, you can understand why. You add those numbers up together. Jokic is 20. Christian Brown got basically 10. Murray got 8. Porter got 6. Gordon got 4. 18, 28, 48 wins about from your starting unit by itself, and then about 5 from your 6 to 10, and then I'd say -2 from the rest of your group. That sounds about right. Denver should have won about 51, 52 games. They only won 50. I could see that. They can get better. They can absolutely get better. And the best way to do that, I think, is to upgrade upon some of these spots lower in the rotation. You can't expect to upgrade much over PJ Hall, Spencer Jones, Trey Alexander. You're going to replace those guys with two-way contract guys. You can't expect much value from those spots. It's just impossible, like not really possible to say it accurately. But I do think that if you're going to sub out some roster spots, like the 3 that you're probably looking at subbing out about 3 roster spots. It's Russell Westbrook, potentially, but probably not. Dario Saric, probably not, but maybe. And then DeAndre Jordan and Vlatko Cancar, who are expiring deals. So if Westbrook leaves and they decide, okay, we have to get better here, and that's fine. But they've only got one taxpayer mid-level exception in order to do that. And then maybe they decide, all right, we're just going to bring back Westbrook. We're going to bring back Westbrook, and we'll get the taxpayer mid-level exception guy. All right, so that's 2 solid spots that, okay, you're probably upgrading on one of the other spots, but you're still getting back Westbrook, who you can't really expect much more from a value perspective from him. He was great, but he also played 28 minutes, and so he accumulated a lot of value there. So could you turn Vlatko Cancar's -0.2 into a minimum guy that could get you a win, I think you could probably do that. That's something you could probably do. But that's just one spot. And so, what I'm trying to express is that Denver doesn't really have a lot of flexibility. They have two unrestricted free agents in DeAndre Jordan, who's at point 0.5, and Flacco Chantar, who's at minus 0.2. So can you turn that 0.3 into 1.3, 2.3, 3.3? Is that a possibility? Maybe. Could you, like, if Westbrook opts out, or let's say he stays and you get that same number, that's really all you got, right? Because if Dario Saric is opting into his deal, you could probably clear him away. You probably have to either buy him out or you trade him along with some sort of asset. But what I'm trying to really express here is that Denver's not going to garner the change that they are trying to get from their bench group, that they would hope to get from their bench group without a trade, because of the amount of guys that they have under roster, the players that they would expect to get better, maybe a Watson. Certainly, you expect Julian Strawther to be more valuable than minus 0.7 wins. I think that that's a fair, it's a fair, reasonable justification there. Even if he was just net neutral, it would be better for the team. And then maybe you get a little bit more from Pickett. Maybe you get a little bit more from Watson. Maybe you get a little bit more, certainly from Gordon. But from a development standpoint, you're not expecting that much more from an actual kind of win accumulation basis. So it's going to be tough. Denver has, like, they're up a creek. They have to get very creative with the limited solutions that they have. I've already talked about it. Last week I talked about it with Jake Coyne on multiple shows, especially free agency stuff. But there are a couple of trade things there as well. The other thing that you could really see is trying to condense multiple bench players into one bench player, maybe somebody that's a little bit better. But even if it's somebody that's like just about the same, just freeing up the roster spot might be valuable. Like, hypothetically, if you get Dario Saric and Hunter Tyson in a deal, both of them expiring contracts, and you trade those guys for a player that makes about $6 million and is maybe a little bit better, then that's a win, in part because you're clearing up another roster spot to potentially add somebody that could play a role next year. That's at least the hope. So, look, we will see what ultimately happens, but I hope that that was a good visual indicator for what Denver's trying to do. If Russell Westbrook comes back, Denver probably has only 2 open bench spots. If he leaves, they have 3. And Denver will need to find ways to upgrade, and they're going to have to do so creatively. If they want to bring in more free agents or some trade options, or maybe even like a draft pick, then they're going to have to get creative with some trades. I think that's pretty simple. All right, folks, that is going to do it, I think, for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by good friends here at Mile High Sports. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Really appreciate the love and support on the podcast as always. I will be back. I think I'm going to do something either Wednesday or Thursday, but I'm going to be co-hosting MHS Today in studio on Wednesday afternoon. So guaranteed you'll see something from me on this channel on MHS Today. I'll be in studio for the entire show with Sean Drotar. Should be fun. Everybody, thank you so much. Have a great one. I will talk to you guys very soon.